play something, then, if you really think you belong here." The words were meant as a joke, a dismissive dare, thrown at a woman they thought was just the janitor. But what happened next silenced an entire auditorium. Naomi Walker had spent 11 years quietly polishing the pianos at one of the nation's most prestigious music conservatories, never touching them, never speaking of the gift she buried long ago. No one knew her story. No one asked. No one believed someone like her could. And from the first trembling note, the world began to change. This is the powerful, true story of how a quiet, overlooked woman stepped into the spotlight. Not with status, not with credentials, but with soul, with truth, and with a sound that would awaken a forgotten piano and an entire generation. Watch until the end, because by then you'll understand. Now, before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every single day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you. And now, let's get back to the story. Naomi Walker's day began long before the first note of music, or so it seemed to others, in the grand halls of the conservatory. In the cool hush of early morning, while the sun was still shyly rising and barely brushed the velvet darkness of the night, Naomi was already at work. With quiet determination and a soul that resonated with unspoken melodies, she swept the marble floors, polished the gleaming windows, and tidied the treasured sanctuaries of sound where music came alive. Yet, as she labored amid the echoes of practice scales and the soft hum of warming instruments, no one ever paused to see the gentle light in her eyes or the wistful smile that flickered at the corner of her lips. She was merely Naomi, the janitor, an invisible fixture in an institution that celebrated music but overlooked the silent symphonies of everyday life. Every day, as she moved from room to room, Naomi absorbed the vibrant energy of the students and the passion of the professors, silently cherishing the music that flowed around her. The notes from practice sessions, the delicate strains of a violin's lament, and the booming chords of a grand piano stirred something deep within her. For Naomi, those sounds were not just ambient noise. They were memories, reminders of a past filled with dreams she once held dear. In the solitude of her nightly routines, she would listen with closed eyes, as if trying to hear a long-forgotten lullaby that had once cradled her heart as a child. Naomi's inner world was a stark contrast to the public indifference that greeted her. While the conservatory patrons and students rushed past her without a glance, she nurtured an entire repertoire of secret melodies. In the quiet corners of her small, modest apartment, a haven far removed from the opulence of the conservatory, she kept every scrap of her past intact. Tucked under a faded quilt lay a worn photograph of a little girl, no older than 6, cradling her mother's hand as they stood beside an old, upright piano. This piano, a relic of a bygone era, had once been the center of Naomi's universe. It was her first window into a world of harmonies and crescendos, a world that she, with all her heart, longed to join. Naomi's memories of that cherished piano were bittersweet. Her mother had been an amateur pianist, whose gentle touch on ivory keys had filled their cramped living room with a warmth that transcended hardship. But as the family's fortunes dwindled and the relentless demands of survival mounted, that instrument of hope had been sold away, a sacrifice made when every penny counted. In the dim light of those days, Naomi had watched the piano disappear in a final act of desperate necessity, leaving her with nothing but echoes and an unfulfilled promise. That loss had planted the seed of longing in her heart, a longing for music and beauty that remained locked away, yearning to be set free. As she scrubbed the polished floors at the conservatory that morning, Naomi's thoughts often drifted back to that tender period of her childhood. She remembered how her tiny fingers would hover hesitantly above the keys, mimicking the graceful movements of her mother as she played soft, lilting melodies. Those moments were fleeting yet eternal, becoming the secret soundtrack to a life that had been defined more by silence than by song. In every drop of water that glistened on the floor after she mopped, she saw a shimmering tear, a silent testament to her lost dreams. In every ripple across a clean window pane, she perceived the reflection of a young girl who once believed that music could change the world. Yet, Despite the years of silence imposed by circumstance and the humdrum routine of her daily labor, Naomi's spirit remained unbroken. Her secret passion for music was not a relic of the past but an ever-present force that pulsed quietly beneath her exterior. Even as she swept the corridors of the conservatory with a humble broom or polished the brass fixtures until they shone like captured sunlight, she listened, not just to the reverberations of practiced notes, but to the music within her soul. That inner melody, complex and aching with unsung cadences, was her true gift. It was the one talent that society had not measured by applause or accolades. It was during these quiet hours, when the museum-like halls lay empty, that Naomi would allow herself to dream. Often, she would lean silently on her mop, her gaze fixed on the empty stage where students had rehearsed grand masterpieces. In those moments, the cavernous space around her transformed into a theater of possibility, where the ghost of that old piano whispered secrets of what might have been. The memory of her mother's soft, lingering tunes filled her with both sorrow and solace. Sorrow for the lost chance to nurture her own musical gift, yet solace in the belief that true beauty could never be silenced, no matter how harshly life tried to subdue it. For Naomi, the conservatory was both her prison and her sanctuary. It confined her to a role of servitude, a background figure in a grand tapestry of sound and spectacle. Yet it also reminded her, every time she paused to listen to the offstage murmurs of tuning instruments or the heartfelt rehearsal of a soloist, that music was everywhere. It existed in the resonant echoes of her labor and in the delicate interplay between light and shadow on a seldom noticed floor. Though the world might pass by without acknowledging her, without knowing her name, Naomi's heart soared every time she heard a melody reminiscent of that old piano. Each note was a declaration of her enduring inner strength, a silent promise that one day, perhaps, her own voice might be heard. Every so often, a stray comment or a fleeting smile from one of the students would pierce the veil of anonymity that enclosed her. But those moments, as rare as they were never enough to change the perennial solitude of her daily existence. And yet, deep within her, a resolute spark persisted, a clandestine vow that the day might come when the music inside her would burst forth and be recognized not as a whisper, but as a resounding symphony capable of stirring the world. Later that morning, the conservatory's grand main hall buzzed with anticipation. Today's event was meant to showcase the finest performances by its talented students and esteemed faculty. Gleaming chandeliers hung low, framing acoustically designed walls that were destined to reverberate with music. Elegant guests, donors, and proud families filled the rows of seats, and the atmosphere was a blend of cultured sophistication and light-hearted expectation. Backstage, Naomi moved quietly through the corridors, her mop and cleaning cart in tow, as she always did. She had long grown accustomed to blending into the background, an unnoticed guardian of the halls where music thrived. Her heart, however, harbored a secret symphony of its own. Even as she scrubbed the polished floors and meticulously dusted the ornate fixtures, she couldn't help but listen closely to the sounds of rehearsals echoing down the hall. Every note and chord resonated with memories of a time when she too dreamed of a life steeped in music, of fingers dancing on keys rather than wielding mops. As the guests settled in and the intermission approached, the mood in the hall shifted from the excited hum of conversation to a more playful atmosphere. Among the organizers and faculty mingling near the stage was Professor Harold Kensington, a charismatic, somewhat mischievous figure known as much for his witty repartee as for his musical genius. In a moment that would redefine the course of the day, he glanced around with a roguish smile and, with a sparkle in his eye, declared loudly enough for all in attendance to hear, "Why not add a little unexpected delight for our guests?" He paused, casting a knowing look in the direction of the service corridor. "Perhaps it's time we see what our very own janitorial staff can offer. After all, isn't it said that talent hides in the most unlikely places? Come on, Ms. Walker, why don't you show us what you can do?" A ripple of amusement spread through the assembled crowd like a wave crashing over fragile sandcastles. Laughter, a mix of genuine mirth and caustic disbelief, echoed off the walls. Whispers fluttered in the air, some in jest, others tinged with condescension. To many, the suggestion was nothing more than an offhand quip, a means of lightening the mood. But for Naomi, the comment struck a deep and stinging chord. Time seemed to slow as the room chattered and giggled. The very laughter that had accompanied countless performances now turned, for a fleeting moment, into a cruel chorus. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. Although she had long hidden her aspirations, the raw passion inside her had never truly been extinguished. The invitation, cruelly masked as a joke, was like an unexpected spotlight forcing her out of the perpetual shadows. The eyes of those in the hall, some twinkling with amusement and others barely concealing their scorn, converged on the closed door behind which she stood. For a suspended moment, Naomi hesitated on the threshold. Her mind raced with memories of a cherished past, the tender lullabies her mother once hummed as she taught her to feel the music in her heart, and the sound of a cherished piano that had once brought magic to her small world. Now, faced with the masquerade of humor and ridicule, she felt the weight of a lifetime of silenced dreams pressing heavily upon her. A murmur of encouragement from the crowd mingled with the snickering. A few daring voices teased, "Come on, show us what you can do, Ms. Mop." The nickname, meant to belittle her presence, stung painfully, yet also kindled a secret fire within her, one that had lain dormant for far too long. With trembling resolve, Naomi exchanged one last lingering look at the familiar cleaning supplies and turned toward the stage. There, leaning against a time-worn wall, sat a battered, broken piano, a relic of forgotten music whose keys were chipped and out of tune. It was nowhere near the majesty of the grand instruments played by students earlier that day, but it held within it a raw and unspoken promise. Every pair of eyes in the room seemed fixed on her reluctant figure as she ascended the small flight of steps. Each step was measured and heavy with both humiliation and the stirring of a long-suppressed desire. The hall fell into a muted hush as she stopped by the piano, a silent challenge hanging in midair. The laughter and jeers receded into an expectant lull, and in that charged moment, the boundary between mortifying ridicule and the possibility of something extraordinary became almost imperceptible. Naomi sat down slowly on the time-worn bench. Her hands, once accustomed only to the steady push of a mop across the floor, now hovered above the chipped keys. The air was electric with the tension of the unknown. She was fully aware that in this moment, under the weight of judgmental stares and echoing laughter just moments before, the facade of the unnoticed janitor might finally be shattered, and if so, in a way that would leave the entire room breathless. Naomi hesitated for a heartbeat as she lowered herself onto the creaky, time-worn bench before the battered piano. For a moment, the world around her seemed to contract into a single suspended instant. Every eye in the hall fixed upon her, every breath held, every mocking chuckle frozen in time. In her trembling hand, the quiet weight of decades-long dreams pressed against her skin. Slowly, as if guided by a force that had been gathering in the silence of her soul for 30 long years, her fingers rose almost imperceptibly above the chipped keys. At first, it was nothing more than a hesitant brush, a soft, tentative touch that barely stirred the dust residing on the worn ivory. One finger grazed a key, and a soft, isolated note shimmered in the cavernous silence of the hall. A note that carried with it memories of a childhood filled with whispered lullabies and the gentle hum of her mother's piano. That singular sound echoed like a secret promise, delicate and pure. It was a sound that had lived inside her for so long, hidden meticulously beneath the everyday clatter of bucket and mop, a melody yearning to break free from its prison of silence. For several long, suspended seconds, Naomi's fingers hovered uncertainly. The initial note trembled in the air, fragile as a whispered prayer, but with that brief resonance came an unmistakable stirring in her heart, a memory of a time when there had been a future filled with crescendos and colorful harmonies rather than unyielding silence. As if compelled by the very weight of her suppressed dreams, she pressed another key. This time, the note was stronger, imbued with a tender longing that vibrated through her hands. The sound was not loud or ostentatious, but carried a raw emotional honesty that belied the years of neglect. The onlookers in the hall, who mere moments ago had laughed at the incongruity of the request, were now drawn inexplicably into a quiet awe. Each subsequent note, once tentative and halting, began to fall into a gentle rhythm. Naomi's musically untrained hands, once solely employed for the steady motions of cleaning, now moved with a purpose that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. The rough, callous tips that had only ever mopped the floors were now coaxing a melody from the battered piano that defied both expectation and the harsh labels imposed upon her. As she continued, a cascade of notes filled the space, at first sparse, then steadily unfolding like the petals of a long-forgotten flower. The broken instrument, far from rendering its sound useless, responded with a raw, unrefined beauty. Every crack in its worn wooden casing, every chipped key, added a layer of haunting character to the music. The notes, layered in gradual complexity, carried the bittersweet timbre of lost days and unspoken desires. From that initial hesitant pluck of sound, a full-fledged melody began to bloom, a melody reminiscent of a lullaby, interwoven with the echoes of hope, sorrow, and an undying passion for music. In that transformative moment, the entire room fell into complete silence. The chatter, the earlier derision, even the ambient clamor of the conservatory, all were eclipsed by the sheer sincerity of the sound emanating from Naomi's fingers. It was as if the very air around her had been transmuted by the unexpected outpouring of beauty. In that suspended silence, every individual present was drawn into the intimate narrative that the melody told. A story of loss and sacrifice, of dreams deferred but never forgotten, and of a quiet strength that had forged its way through years of invisibility. With each ensuing note, Naomi's uncertainty melted away, replaced by a calm resolve and a resurgence of the passion that had once filled her heart. The melody grew more assured, carrying a gentle crescendo that lifted the spirits of those who listened. It was a moment of metamorphosis. The janitor, once relegated to the background of the conservatory's daily routine, was now, against all odds, giving life to a long-suppressed symphony. In that singular performance, every note rang out not as a mere sound, but as a testament to the resilience of a soul that had been quiet too long, a soul that had, without knowing it, been holding the power to break the bonds of silence and let its truth be heard. In the wake of that first tentative note, a palpable hush fell over the grand hall. As Naomi's fingers began to find their rhythm, every soul in the room found itself irresistibly drawn into the gentle, mesmerizing cascade of sound. The broken piano, with its chipped keys and outdated tuning, seemed to transform under Naomi's touch. The creaks and whispers of the instrument blended with her melody, as if the entire aging contraption, long thought to be nothing more than a relic, had awoken to honor the music that had been locked away inside her for so many years. The room, once alive with casual chatter and the occasional snicker at her unexpected invitation, gradually bowed to a reverent quiet. For each note Naomi struck, the sound bounced off the high vaulted ceilings and into every corner of the hall. Time itself appeared to slow. Many in attendance felt as though they were suspended in a dreamlike state, where every heart was attuned to this sudden, transcendent beauty. The laughter and idle whispers that had earlier punctuated the air had evaporated, leaving behind only the pure cadence of her performance. Among the silent, rapt faces in the audience, one figure sat forward, eyes wide and glistening with a mix of astonishment and recognition. Professor Darby, a distinguished instructor known for his encyclopedic knowledge of rare musical compositions, leaned in as if to catch every nuance. His experienced ear, refined over countless concerts and recitals, immediately discerned an unusual motif woven throughout Naomi's melody. A faint, archaic embellishment reminiscent of a lost musical work rumored to have been composed by a forgotten virtuoso from a bygone era. The subtle interplay of major and minor chords, the delicate trill that wove in and out of the primary theme, and the unexpected shift in tempo all evoked a composition that Professor Darby had once studied in a dusty archive. A piece that had long since vanished from the public repertoire. A thrill of disbelief ran through him. With shaking hands, he produced his smartphone from the depths of his worn jacket. Without a moment's hesitation, he launched the camera app and began recording this once-in-a-lifetime performance. The soft, soulful strains of Naomi's impromptu concert, previously destined to fade into the background as just another fleeting moment of a busy day, were now being captured in crisp detail. Every note, every pause, every emotion-laden inflection danced eerily on the screen, archived for posterity by someone who understood its true significance. As Professor Darby recorded, the palpable silence in the hall deepened further. Students, faculty, and even the visiting guests were now transfixed, not merely out of polite courtesy, but because each of them felt the magic resonating from Naomi's performance. Her melody, born out of years of muted longing, now enveloped the space with a power that transcended labels and appearances. Here was a sound that wasn't orchestrated from a celebrated instrument, but coaxed from a battered, broken piano by a woman whose name had been lost in the corridors of the conservatory, until now. The recording quickly spread through the anxious network of smartphones and social media. One student's impromptu upload, capturing that fleeting moment of vulnerability and virtuosity, began to amass views almost instantly. In what felt like minutes, exchanges rapidly mutated from mere whispers into a cacophony of stunned silence and digital fervor. Comments and shares exploded online, and soon the clip was circulating far beyond the confines of the conservatory's venerable walls. People across the region found themselves transfixed by the unlikeliest of performers, an unknown janitor whose hidden talent brought forth a melody that defied both time and expectation. Within the hall, the effect was equally seismic. People who had arrived earlier with expectations of conventional performances now sat motionless, their eyes glistening with tears born of nostalgia, regret, and a sudden realization that the beauty in life often lies where one least expects it. Even those who had once sneered at the mere idea of a janitor's talent now found themselves overcome with a collective, quiet awe. The musical phrases Naomi played spoke of all that she had endured, the long years of silenced aspirations, the muted dreams of a childhood lost to hardship, and the solitary battles fought in the margins of a world that celebrated only the overt genius of others. In that suspended moment, as the final notes of her melody hung in the charged air, the room's silence became an emblem of unspoken respect, a shared acknowledgement that something miraculous had just occurred. Professor Darby, still holding his phone, looked around as if to see if anyone else recognized the profundity of what had just unfolded. Across the audience, whispers began to emerge, soft exclamations of, "Did you hear that?" and, "It's like nothing I've ever heard before." Even the most cynical onlookers appeared subdued, having been momentarily transformed by the unanticipated song. Naomi herself, seated at the battered piano, seemed to notice the shift in the atmosphere. Her eyes, once filled with the weight of quiet resignation, now sparkled with the faint glimmer of hope. For a fleeting second, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps she was no longer invisible, that her inner brilliance had finally echoed outward into a world too long content with surface appearances. The recording, now making its way across digital screens and sparking conversations in hushed tones online, was destined to disrupt the status quo. In that brief span of time, a janitor's secret dream had shattered the preconceptions of an entire conservatory, proving that the power of music isn't measured by credentials or titles. Sometimes, all it takes is the courage to share a piece of one's soul, a melody born in silence that can captivate hearts and inspire change. As the viral clip of Naomi's impromptu performance spread across social media and local news outlets, curiosity turned into a determined search for the person behind the extraordinary melody. Within days, the halls of the conservatory and the quiet corners of the town buzzed with questions. Who was she? How could a janitor harbor such hidden talent? Soon, a retired musicologist, a man with decades of experience scouring archives for forgotten musical legends, began to piece together fragments of Naomi's past. Using old newspaper clippings, community records, and whispered recollections from longtime locals, he uncovered her true identity, Naomi Walker, a once promising musician whose dreams had been stifled by hardship, loss, and circumstance. Naomi's name emerged slowly, like a long-buried treasure finally revealed by the gentle light of perseverance. The discovery of Naomi's name sent shockwaves through the community. Suddenly, discussions that had once focused solely on the mystery of her unprompted performance shifted toward the story of her life, a story of untouched potential and silent perseverance. In hushed interviews arranged at a local community center, Naomi reluctantly recounted her early days. She spoke quietly about her childhood in a rundown neighborhood on the edge of the city, where the strains of music were both a solace and a forbidden luxury. Her mother, a modest amateur pianist, had once filled their tiny home with tender lullabies and impromptu recitals. But when financial hardship struck, the cherished family piano, the one instrument that had kindled her musical passion, was sold to keep the family afloat. The loss was devastating. It marked the end of her childhood dreams and the beginning of a life where survival cast long shadows over art. Naomi described how, as the years passed, her dreams of musical study and performance were slowly replaced by the gritty demands of everyday tasks. Forced by circumstance into service roles, she eventually found herself in the conservatory's dimly lit corridors. Although she worked hard each day, sweeping floors, washing windows, and attending to every nook and cranny, the music inside her never truly faded. Instead, it grew silently, a personal and secret symphony that accompanied every lonely shift and every tired step. The pain of watching other students perform on glorious instruments, while she wielded only a mop and bucket, was a bittersweet reminder of what she had lost. The world had never offered Naomi a chance to pursue her passion, until now. As news of her background and her prodigious talent spread, the conservatory's guests, alumni, and even current students began to rally around her. Stories poured in about a young girl who once dreamed of playing the piano, a girl whose eyes would light up at every note played in the music hall. Volunteers and benefactors began calling, offering words of encouragement and pledging their support to help her reclaim the life of music she had once imagined. One influential benefactor, known for discovering and nurturing neglected talent, took particular interest. He saw in Naomi not just the story of a janitor with a hidden gift but an emblem of the human spirit's resilience, a living reminder that beauty and talent often flourish in the most unlikely places. Yet, as the praise and attention grew, so too did the weight of Naomi's memories. In quiet moments after her performance, when the applause had faded and the digital buzz slowed to a contemplative hum, she was overcome by the ghost of a past filled with missed opportunities. In a vivid flashback, she recalled the day her mother had tearfully explained why the piano, the only instrument of hope in her small world, had been sold. The memory was painful. A scene of poverty, sacrifice, and the bitter realization that dreams, once vibrant, could be bartered away for mere survival. That day marked her turning point, a moment when she resigned herself to a life in the background, believing that the music within her was meant only for secret moments of quiet solace. Despite the lingering sorrow, the growing support around her began to heal the wounds of abandonment. The conservatory administration, spurred by public outcry and the undeniable evidence of her talent, extended an offer that transformed Naomi's world. For the first time, she was invited, not as a cleaning staff member shrouded in anonymity, but as a performer. It wasn't an open mic or a casual recital. It was an official invitation to take the stage at the conservatory's Grand Concert Hall, a venue known for launching stellar musical careers. The overwhelming response from students, faculty, and art lovers rekindled her belief in the possibility of redemption, a chance to reclaim the beauty of her youth. At first, Naomi hesitated. The idea of performing for an audience stirred feelings of both exhilaration and terror. Years of being ignored and pigeonholed had left her with a deep-seated self-doubt. Had she lost her musical touch entirely, or was the quiet melody in her heart strong enough to rise above the echoes of past disappointment? Late at night, alone in her modest apartment, she would close her eyes and imagine the sound of a piano filling the room, a sound that could mend broken dreams and heal old scars. Slowly, the supportive voices of her newfound community transformed that inner hesitance into quiet resolve. In a symbolic gesture of renewal, the conservatory announced plans to gift Naomi a brand new grand piano, a magnificent instrument that would be dedicated in her honor. The instrument, polished to a mirror sheen and brimming with promise, was to be placed in the very hall where she once quietly swept the floors. The announcement reverberated through the community. Here was a woman whose journey from the shadows was about to culminate in a moment of triumphant return. While the digital world buzzed with hashtags celebrating the comeback of Naomi Walker, the local grounds, too, began to shimmer with a tentative hope that the past, with all its pain, could be transformed into a joyful future. Finally, as the day of her upcoming performance approached, a palpable excitement replaced the long-held despair. Naomi, with a modest yet determined smile, quietly accepted that she was being given a second chance. A chance to let the music within her speak in a voice that had been silenced for far too long. For the first time in her life, she would step away from her role as the unseen caretaker and embrace the spotlight that heralded the revival of her long-suppressed passion. The stage was being prepared, the audience awaited in earnest, and the whisper of destiny promised that this night would not be just another performance, but the beginning of a legacy. In the weeks following the viral sensation, the echoes of Naomi's impromptu performance still reverberated throughout the conservatory and the surrounding community. Newspapers, blogs, and social media were alive with praise, and grateful voices declared that the world had finally noticed the woman who had been synonymous with quiet service for so long. Invitations poured in from even the highest echelons of the musical world, and the conservatory's administration, emboldened by the overwhelming public response, decided it was time to offer Naomi a formal opportunity. An official solo performance on stage at the grand concert hall of the institution that had been her everyday backdrop. Yet, when the invitation was extended personally to her, Naomi felt her heart tremble with a mix of hope and profound dread. In a small, cluttered office behind the conservatory's administrative wing, they presented her with a proposal that read almost like a fairy tale. Naomi Walker, in recognition of your extraordinary talent, we cordially invite you to perform a solo recital on our main stage. You are to be our honored guest and the very embodiment of the truth that art comes from the most unlikely of places. The words, though warm and sincere, struck deep into Naomi's long-hidden insecurities. She looked down at her hands that had tenderly scrubbed floors and dusted ancient shelves for so many years, and felt the weight of unfulfilled dreams. "I'm not worthy," she murmured softly, more to herself than to the committee before her. Her voice, small and trembling, betrayed a lifetime of being sidelined. Every kind word from strangers, every heartfelt compliment from the local papers, felt at once like a bomb and an accusation. How could the gentle janitor, whose daily existence had been defined by obscurity, now be expected to take center stage? The self-doubt that had festered over decades of silent longing surged forth, and Naomi found herself resolutely refusing the invitation. "I don't belong on that stage," she declared, her eyes fixed on the pattern of her worn hands. "My life has been all about cleaning, not performing. I've never been a musician in the way you expect." Yet, as news of her rejection spread, something unexpected began to brew. A chorus of voices, students, professors, well-wishers, and even strangers touched by her story, refused to let Naomi's voice remain forever stifled. A grassroots campaign sprang into action. Neighborhoods that once passed her by now held fundraisers, charity concerts, and art auctions specifically to honor the talent that had so long been hidden within the silent corridors of the conservatory. Community leaders, moved by what they described as the magic of a silent symphony finally calling out, organized events and encouraged local businesses and alumni to contribute toward a gift that would change Naomi's destiny. One influential benefactor, a retired concert pianist whose career had waned into a quiet life of mentoring and philanthropy, took the initiative. "There is no greater injustice than forcing silence upon a precious soul," he passionately told local reporters. "Naomi's gift is not just a talent. It's a beacon. We owe it to her, and to the world, to give her every opportunity to show what beauty can be born from everyday life." Slowly, a remarkable sum was raised with an inspired vigor that blended empathy with genuine excitement. With the funds secured, it was decided that Naomi would be given a state-of-the-art grand piano, a brilliant, gleaming instrument that symbolized not only modern excellence but also the promise of renewal and a second chance. When the new piano was unveiled in a solemn ceremony in the entrance hall of the conservatory, its polished ebony and ivory keys glimmered in the soft light, catching the eyes of everyone present. The instrument, donated in honor of Naomi and embossed with her name, represented the community's firm belief that true artistry should not be hidden in the shadows. At that very moment, despite her lingering fears, Naomi felt a tentative stirring of courage in her chest. A feeling that perhaps this was not simply a case of misplaced expectation, but a genuine opportunity to reclaim a part of herself long denied. After much thought and with hesitant resolve, Naomi finally agreed to a public performance. But she made one irrefutable condition. She would perform in that same hall where she had spent countless quiet hours sweeping its floors, where she had listened day in and day out to the glorious sounds of the very music she had once only dared to dream about. "I want it to be here, in the rooms I've always known," she insisted, her voice soft but unwavering. "I want you to see that the place which has been my refuge in silence can also be the stage for the full expression of my heart." Preparations for the upcoming recital moved rapidly. The conservatory refurbished the concert hall with an air of expectancy, and flyers praising Naomi Walker's second chance were posted all around town. Rehearsal sessions were arranged under the close guidance of Professor Darby and other supportive mentors. Behind closed doors, Naomi practiced with trepidation. Her fingers, though used to the rough calluses of labor, trembled as they pressed against the new piano's pristine keys. Over time, as each practice session unfolded, the haunted timbre of her past merged with the bright promise of the future. The music that had long been bottled up in her heart began to flow, soft at first, then with increasing confidence. Every note was a quiet rebellion against the years of obscurity, every chord a testament that dreams refused to die, even when left unspoken for decades. With determination slowly replacing doubt, the day of the official recital finally arrived. The concert hall, now filled with expectant faces spanning generations, from curious students to figures from the community who remembered a time when Naomi was just an unnoticed janitor, hummed silently in the soft prelude to what was becoming a historic moment. Dressed in the same work uniform that had defined her days yet complemented by a simplicity that radiated quiet dignity, Naomi stood backstage. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears and a quiet resolve as she summarily reflected on the journey that had led her here, from the silent floors of the conservatory to the promise of a grand stage. In accepting this second chance, Naomi was not just stepping onto the stage. She was stepping into her own long-suppressed narrative. It was a moment where the unspoken and invisible was finally acknowledged. As the lights dimmed and the audience fell into an expectant hush, she took one deep, steadying breath. She knew that ahead lay not just the performance of her life, but the reclaiming of her identity, a reawakening of the voice that had been locked away for too long. That night, as the sumptuous concert hall filled to overflowing capacity, the air buzzed with anticipatory energy and hushed whispers of wonder. Clad in her simple work uniform, the same faded blouse and practical trousers she had worn countless times while dutifully mopping floors and dusting instrument cases, she nevertheless carried within her an unmistakable radiance. There was now a subtle gleam in her eyes, a spark of defiance and hope that outshone any material attire. Today, she would step out not as the unseen janitor of the conservatory, but as a performer whose soul was laden with unspoken melodies finally ready to rise. With measured steps, Naomi emerged from the narrow, backstage corridor onto a modest catwalk that led to the grand stage. The moment was surreal. Every audible sound in the hall seemed to fall away, replaced by an expectant silence that carried the weight of collective longing. The audience, once casual onlookers who had taken her service for granted or even mocked her hidden potential, now watched in rapt attention as she strode forward. Her appearance was incongruous with the opulence of this musical sanctuary, a uniformed caretaker now bearing the courage of an artist reclaiming her destiny. At the base of the stage stood the newly gifted grand piano, its polished ebony finish and immaculate ivory keys shimmering under spotlights. It was a majestic instrument, symbolizing not only modern excellence, but also the culmination of a journey marred by quiet sacrifice and the relentless pursuit of a dream. Naomi's hands, roughened by years of habitual labor, trembled for a moment as she reached out and gently caressed the keys. A tender reunion between a long-silenced part of her soul and the instrument that had once represented everything she had yearned to become. After taking a deep, steadying breath, she seated herself upon the elegant bench with a grace that belied her years of obscurity. The benches in that hall had witnessed countless celebrated recitals before, but never had they borne witness to such an intimate, stirring reconnection with a long-dormant passion. The house lights dimmed almost imperceptibly, and an expectant hush fell over the crowd, as if the entire gathering collectively braced itself for a revelation. Naomi's fingers moved tentatively at first, lightly touching a single key and eliciting a soft, plaintive note, a whispered promise that resonated like the first rays of dawn. Then, as if empowered by a force that had been patiently building within her all those lonely years, her touch deepened, and the melody began to swell. The initially sparse notes transformed gradually into a sweeping, enthralling composition, a musical narrative that recounted the pain of lost opportunities, the weight of silent suffering, and the shimmering hope of rebirth. Every note was imbued with the memory of a stolen childhood, echoing the bittersweet cadence of lullabies once sung by her mother, and capturing the unyielding longing that had kept her spirit alive in the dim corridors of the conservatory. As the performance advanced, the power of her music transcended technical perfection. It was as though each tone wove itself into an incantation that melted away years of neglect and misunderstanding. The audience, initially spellbound, began to share in an experience that moved them on a deeply personal level. Many closed their eyes. Some had tears glistening on their cheeks. The sound emanating from that grand piano, born of simple, heartfelt defiance, seemed capable of dissolving the barriers between souls. The recital reached its peak in a climactic crescendo, a final, forceful chord that reverberated across the hall, filling every corner of that vast space with its powerful presence. In that suspended moment, when the sound finally faded into an almost sacred silence, it was as if time itself had paused. Every listener sat utterly still, absorbing the enormity of the emotion conveyed in that single transcendent chord. For a heartbeat, the very air crackled with raw intensity, and in that stillness, the audience seemed to share a collective breath, a moment of unity that spoke louder than any applause. Then, as if the overwhelming beauty of the music could no longer be contained, an eruption of emotion swept the hall. A murmur grew into a crescendo of spontaneous, heartfelt applause, a standing ovation that rose like a tidal wave of gratitude and recognition. Tears streamed down the faces of those who had been moved beyond words, and joyful cheers mingled with the persistent clapping of hands. The once dismissive laughter, the casual indifference, were replaced by an ovation that celebrated the triumph of a hidden talent emerging brilliantly into the spotlight. For Naomi, standing there in her humble uniform, that moment was beyond triumph. It was an affirmation. The echoes of her performance rippled through the hearts of everyone present, a powerful reminder that talent resides in the most unassuming souls, and that the courage to reclaim one's passion can transform lives. In the midst of that roaring applause, she allowed herself a quiet smile, a smile that acknowledged the painful past and embraced the promise of a future filled with possibility. As the audience continued to applaud, rising to their feet and clapping with an intensity that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hall, Naomi's final note remained a potent silence, a vow that even in the depths of neglect, a second chance could give birth to a melody that might one day still the noise of the world. This story proves: never underestimate the one who has been silent, for they may speak in a way that makes the whole world fall silent. Subscribe if you believe in second chances.